Welcome, everybody, to Beyond the Shadows. I'm author and ghost historian Mike Ricksecker. Tonight, we're going to be talking about mysterious places of the world. So it's going to be a lot of different creepy, spooky places. We're going to be talking about ancient sites of power and all kinds of other... Well, we just had the triangle episode, the supernatural triangles of the world episode on the Haunted Road Media YouTube channel, which got into a lot of different strange type of supernatural phenomenon and what happens in those different vortex areas, or vortex areas. Vortices would be plural. We're going to be talking about a lot of that stuff too. But first, just before we kick off into all of that, a couple of quick announcements. So first of all is Peripheral from Leslie Fear was just released today. This is a new Haunted Road Media book release, so please be sure to check that out. It is a supernatural romance thriller. You can find it on Amazon, of course, or you can go to hauntedroadmedia.com and get the link there, which of course will take you to Amazon as well. But new book from Leslie Fear. Check it out. It's really, really good. And this was really like a really, what I want to say, it was a heartfelt endeavor from Leslie. She put her heart and soul into this book, so please go ahead and check that out. Also, for those of you that have not seen yet, next summer I will be hosting a Ancient Mysteries of Ireland tour. That's being put on by Mysterious Adventures Tours and hauntedjourneys.com. So I'd love for you guys to join us. So the capacity is limited. It's limited to 24. There were several spots that have already filled up, but it's a year away. I know we have no idea what's going on with COVID at that point in time. I'm hoping a year from now it'll be fine. So again, would love to have some Mad Hatters out there in Ireland. So this is going to be a very, very cool trip. All kinds of castles, stone circles, many things that are going to be included with this trip. So you can check that out. Again, mysteriousAdventurestours.com and hauntedjourneys.com. You get all the details there. So it's going to be a great time. So what's also a great time is this show, Beyond the Shadows, where we are going to be covering mysterious places of the world. So feel free down in the chat to toss me your mysterious places. If it's a bucket list item or a place that you went to that you thought was creepy cool or what have you, and we'll discuss those places as well. I'm going to be, well, for me, some of them I visited. I guess maybe one. And others I will be visiting, and others that are bucket list items somewhere down the road. I'm going to start off maybe a... thank you, QG, for letting me know that it still says... All right, took off the lower third. There we go. All right. So we're going to start this off kind of we'll go down a creepy cool route. We'll get into some places that are a little bit more macabre, then we'll get into some more like ancient sites of powers and that type of mysterious energy type of places. So where we are going first, the Paris Catacombs. That's right. This one's a bucket list item of mine. I've always wanted to check this place out. Really for years and years and years. I will have to say that the movie As Above, So Below. If you guys have ever seen that, it has made me want to really dive into the restricted section, the area that you're not supposed to go, because I actually filmed it there. So I think it's still the only movie that was ever filmed almost entirely in the Paris Catacombs. Really, really wild. But this whole place, just the backstory of it. Where basically what happened here, these are old mines from the area around Paris, which B3 Aerospace is telling me, no, don't do it. Well, yeah, I mean, you can't get arrested for that. So so I'm not encouraging people to do it. I'm just saying, hey, I do fancy to go to the restricted section. In any case, so these were actually mines that are around Paris. And of course, the city expanded. And one of the issues was, so the cemeteries also not only the mines, but the cemeteries were also originally outside the city of Paris. And what happened is, of course, the city grew and grew and grew, and eventually, surrounded the cemetery. Well, they kept dumping bodies and dumping bodies and dumping bodies into the cemetery, and eventually, what happened was and this was the Cemetery of the Innocents. It was the name of the cemetery. A wall from an adjoining building to the cemetery. You can see how basically the city is built around it. These are illustrations from the 1700s. And for those that are watching the YouTube live stream, those that are listening to the podcast later won't actually be able to see this. But basically, it had gotten so jam-packed with bodies that walls to adjacent buildings were caving in and bodies were spilling out into the basements of buildings next door. So they made a plan to go ahead and remove the bodies. And this is one illustration where you can actually see some of the skulls, and you're kind of digging things up here. To move the bodies to the mines. Took several years to go ahead and do that. And the mines ended up becoming what we now call the Paris Catacombs. So, really, really very creepy and macabre, but, it's a massive tourist attraction now, because you can see that as they were putting the bones in there, at some point they decided, well, instead of just dumping all the bodies in here, we're going to them, this was like creating a shrine. And so they enshrined all of these bodies into these mines that were down there. So, very, very creepy. B3 Aerospace Paris Municipal Ossuary, 1786, I think is older, like Roman times. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these bodies go way, way back. So, like I said, that originally the cemetery was outside the city limits of Paris. Well, now, I mean, Paris has expanded and expanded, that it expanded far, far past the cemetery. But they kept dumping the bodies in there, and then, it just became too much. So, it's kind of the same thing with our next tale here, which we'll keep a little macabre here for a short time. So the Sedlec Ossuary, this is in Kutná Hora, Czech Republic, and basically what the deal here is, they call this the Church of the Bones. And what had happened is a bishop back in, I want to say it was the 13th century, had brought back dirt from Golgotha, from the place where that Jesus was supposed to have been crucified. So he brought this dirt back, sprinkled it amongst the grounds, and because the townspeople had heard, well, this church, it's just the Church of All Saints, because this church was supposed to have this dirt from Golgotha, they wanted to be buried there. And so the cemetery became inundated with bodies and bodies and bodies and bodies. Well, again, kind of the same thing. The city expanded past the cemetery. And so they eventually shut the cemetery down, and it was, it was like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We're talking like, again, in the 13th century where it got shut down. And what they ended up doing was, in the place where the chapel is at. So this does not encompass the entire Church of All Saints. This is just a part of it. And what they ended up doing was they stacked all of these skeletons in this area of the church, basically like the basement area. And it wasn't until the 1800s that that somebody came in. I forget his name, but basically to clean this up, and he created this macabre artwork. And what was he? He was a sculptor. Okay, and he created this macabre architecture down there in the Sedlec ossuary is what it's now called. So yeah, I mean, this is basically, what is that, like a chandelier? I'm sorry if those that are on the podcast can't see this. It's essentially a chandelier of bones. That's why they call it the Church of the Bones. So he was a local wood carver is what it was. So yeah. So we'll stay in that part of the world for right now. And we are actually going to move on to the Hoia Baciu Forest. This is actually in Romania. So, okay, south from the Czech Republic. This location is one of those energy vortex areas. And we're going to be getting into more of that here very, very shortly. And you can see, for those watching on YouTube, how the trees grow in a very strange way. They're all very twisted like this. There's a lot of urban legends about the place, of course, concerning paranormal activity, extraterrestrials, things like that. People go into the forest, and they feel that energy surrounding them. People talk about feeling lightheaded when they go in. There's an area of the forest where things don't grow. So it's been pretty much chalked up to one of these energy vortex areas that really there hasn't been. Usually when we see these areas, we see standing stones, we see structures, pyramids, whatever. We're going to get into some of that. This one doesn't really have that. It has the twisted trees. It has the area that nothing grows, but yet people go in there and they actually feel the energy and they experience a lot of different type of supernatural phenomena within there. So, did I miss? Victoria's saying we have trees like that. They're near the coast. They grow bent because of the constant wind. Yeah, this is in the middle of Romania. So that's one of the kind of crazy things about this forest is that this isn't at a place like it's near the coast or what have you. This is very much inland, and it's a fairly sizable forest. So yeah, and Robert Hanna, in the middle of the forest, nothing grows, and that's one of the attributes of this supposed vortex area. I know a lot of paranormal investigators have gone out there. You can, even here on YouTube, you can look up Hoia Baciu Forest and find all kinds of different people that have gone out there to try to document this crazy activity. And they do get some interesting paranormal activity out there. So, very, very creepy, mysterious area out in the middle of a forest. So, Rick Gabbert, when was that forest discovered? Well, I mean, the forest has been there for for a long, long time. I can't say it's always been there because, of course, over millions of years, the landscape has changed. But I mean, the forest has been there, for a long, long time. It's not like it was planted or whatever at some point. So, Victoria, big explosion or a meteor hit? So that's an interesting question. There is, where does somebody might have it down there, the Moldavite. It's that area of the world where Moldavite comes from. Where basically it was a meteor that came down, struck. Is it the Czech Republic or is it Romania? I'm thinking it was Romania, where that meteor hit. It's the green crystals, but you can see how it was fluid and melted and all that. And because of the vegetation that was there at the time when the meteor hit, it created it into a green type of crystal, kind of like with the Libyan desert glass, where the meteor hit and it turned it into a whitish yellow type of a crystal. So it's an interesting question. Is it possible that in that center where nothing grows, Was there a meteor that once hit there? It's a good question. No idea. Fungi, do they go there with dowsing rods? They go out there with all kinds of things. Dowsing rods, EMF detectors. People go out there with, how I feel about spirit boxes. Well, they'll go out there with spirit boxes, all the different cameras and everything. So they go out there with a lot of different type of equipment. So, but dowsing rods, yeah, they've gone out there with that. Yeah, Alina, I'd like to see Mike spend a whole night at a haunted forest one night. I it wasn't haunted, but I used to have the forest right in my own backyard. So you never know. Maybe someday soon. We'll see. So, but that kind of leads me into as we're talking about more of these energy type areas, the triangle areas. So I covered this on the Haunted Road Media channel here very recently, this past Friday. If you haven't seen the video yet, please go ahead and check it out. I was, of course, on the Alaska Triangle here just this past, when did that come out? February? And so people are really familiar with the Bermuda Triangle. And basically, this is an area of the world in which is it's a concentrated vortex area. So energy from the Earth's core has basically welled up into this area. We call them triangles because there's usually 3 points on a map that we kind of put it between, but it's really more amorphous. It doesn't necessarily have a set shape, but we call it triangles because we like to put it into 3 points like that. And so we're really familiar with the Bermuda Triangle, which is Bermuda, Miami, and in Puerto Rico. Of course, this is where we've had all kinds of flights go missing, boats go missing. Bruce Gernon had that crazy portal that he basically flew through and ended up 30 minutes ahead of schedule to his intended destination. All kinds of crazy things. When we did the Alaska Triangle, we talked about a lot of different strange phenomena up there. Again, missing airplanes, crazy things going on with ghost ships. Of course, all kinds of cryptid activity and things like that. Another interesting thing about the Bermuda Triangle is the Bimini Road, and we're going to see that in some of these different locations that are like this. Now, the Bimini Road is a structure under the water, which, basically it does look like a man-made structure. They call it a road because it runs in a straight line. For all we know, it's the top of a wall, but it's near Bimini, and it looks like a road, so that's what we call it. Now, many people believe this may be the lost city of Atlantis. And, of course, the mainstream likes to say that, well, it's a natural structure. For those that are watching YouTube, that does not look exactly natural to me. And if you actually view the whole thing, I'd be very, very hard-pressed to call that natural. So it definitely looks like a man-made structure. Now, is it the lost city of Atlantis? And that's probably where the mainstream just likes to say, no, it's not man-made at all, because they don't want to deal with the questions of Atlantis. Well, I don't necessarily think it's Atlantis either, but I do believe it's man-made. Now, there are all over the world, I would venture to say hundreds, maybe thousands, I probably have to be thousands, of lost cities all over the place. Our water level right now is quite a bit higher than it was, say, 10,000 years ago. There's a thing known as the Ice Age that we no longer are in, and once that ice melted, the water had to go somewhere, and so the water level has been raising ever since then. And so these coastal towns and islands and all these different locations are now underwater. So Bimini Road, I would certainly say it is a lost human civilization. Atlantis, you'd have to sell me a lot more on that, because there are other locations across the world that seem more likely. People have made great cases for. I don't necessarily ascribe to a single one, but people have made great cases for locations all over the world. So for me, that one is it's a lost human civilization, but not necessarily Atlantis. All right. So that was Bermuda. I did want to hit on some of the other triangle areas here. So Bridgewater, this is Abington, Freetown, and Rehoboth in Massachusetts. A little bit of a smaller one, but still a lot of crazy activity that happens in there. The Hockomock Swamp is the more centralized area that has this activity. Again, paranormal activity, supernatural sightings, all different types of cryptids, like dogs with red eyes. There are Bigfoot sightings in there, different things like that. Extraterrestrial sightings also occurred around there. It seems to be a hotspot for UFOs. And that's also another thing that seems to go kind of part and parcel with these different areas are the extraterrestrial sightings. You get a lot of those in these different areas as well. So it leads you to wonder, okay, are the extraterrestrials also attracted to these different magnetic areas? And I see that Tom McNicholas has a question. What do you think the energy in the what do you think the energy in the triangles comes from? Basically, that is the energy from the Earth's core that comes up into these areas in a more concentrated way. So there could be a variety of reasons as to why it's more concentrated in that one particular area. When we talk about the telluric currents that run across the Earth, basically the Earth's energy grid and what have you. In these particular areas that have this more centralized energy, could it be, well, like in Alaska, the Earth there is more volatile, so it's moving around more, it's shaking more. So you have that type of energy that's more directed toward there. Could it be something like maybe the Earth's crust in that location is a little thinner or what have you, or maybe there are again, kind of like in Alaska, where you have these fault lines, and so there's that energy that's welling there, but also it would give you more access to the core because you have these cracks that are right there. So could it be something like that? So there's a variety of reasons as to why this energy could be there, but it is that energy, that magnetic energy from the Earth's core that's coming up into these areas. And that's essentially what we end up calling a vortex. So the other things that happen around it, like the portals, the portal is basically created from the vortex energy. So for those planes that have gone missing, like Flight 19 in the Bermuda Triangle, or the missing Douglas in Alaska, and what have you, and a lot of these, and we'll get to the Nevada Triangle here in a moment, and in other locations, are they disappearing through a portal that the vortex has created? And there is some evidence to show that, well, maybe they have. So, Tim Schoen, could there still be as yet undiscovered triangles? Yeah, sure. I think a lot of these places are, some of them are remote, so we're not as familiar with them. Others, like Bridgewater's in a more populated area. Bermuda, there's so much traffic through there. Even now, people take cruises through there. My parents just before COVID went on a cruise, and they cruised right through the Bermuda Triangle. To get to Anchorage, Alaska, you have to fly through, the Alaska Triangle. We get to some of these. Let's get to one of these others. That's Bridgewater. Okay, so the Dragon Triangle. So this is the one over near Japan. So Japan to the Philippines, to the Bonin Islands, which is like Guam. this area here. Now, the Japanese government has actually declared part of this area dangerous for sea travel. There's been so many lost shipping vessels, fishing boats. One of the more famous incidents was Kublai Khan, which was the grandson of Genghis Khan, and he lost a fleet that had 40,000 crew members within that fleet. It was a massive fleet. It was an invasion that they had planned, and they lost their crew to these waters. So I guess not too long ago they have rediscovered that fleet at the bottom of the water. So it's even with knowing that some of these areas are very dangerous, you still get the traffic through there. So I guess in a way you're taking that chance. Now, the numbers are small. I mean, how many flights have gone up to Alaska? How many times have people, gone through the Bermuda Triangle? Even Christopher Columbus sailed through the Bermuda Triangle. Now, he mentioned seeing a ball of fire crash into the water. It's probably a meteor, but it makes you wonder, is that meteor that he saw helping to feed what's going on there in the Bermuda Triangle? There could have been many meteors that fell into the water there. But he also mentioned that his compass was acting extremely erratic while traveling through those waters. The Nevada Triangle here. I mean, this is Reno to Las Vegas to Fresno. I think people are going to Reno and Vegas a lot. It's you got the Sierra Nevada mountains there, so that is treacherous. Area 51 is also in that area, so talk about a mysterious area. There's definitely a lot of mysterious things going on in Area 51. So what's interesting here about the Nevada Triangle, they talk about a mountain wave, which is a interesting gravitational phenomenon where the mountain range, as you go up in elevation, it actually has some of its own gravity. And so that gravity wave from the mountains can actually affect the airplane's instruments. So as they get closer to some of these mountains, their instruments can start acting a little wonky, and that is where some of these crashes do happen. So it's not necessarily supernatural, it's more natural, but it has to do with the energy that's within these mountains in that area. And so they have had tens of thousands of crashes within the mountains there over 60-year period. So it's quite extensive. Victoria Monday, hollow earth. Could it be a system of caverns and not really a hollow earth? Little bit of a different topic, but that would be a mysterious area of the earth, right? Okay, hollow earth. And I believe you're right. So there is that crazy illustration out there where they kind of make the earth look like a set of parentheses, and then there's like a sun in the middle, and all this other stuff going on within the middle of the earth. I don't think that the earth is just a shell with all kinds of other stuff inside of it. But the idea that there are large caverns throughout the world that would essentially make parts of the earth hollow, I do believe that. We do see rather large cave systems around the world, and also if you take into account for lava tubes, which in the deeper parts of the world could be much bigger than what we're accustomed to closer to the surface. As you get further down, those magma vents expand and expand and expand as you get closer to the core. So would old lava tubes further into the earth be larger? Yeah, they would be larger. So in that sense, those areas would have a hollowness to the Earth. So, but I don't think it's just one. I don't think we're a giant shell. People think that about the moon too. The interesting thing about the moon, though, is that in studies that they've done, there is a bit of hollowness to the moon, where when they crashed one of the landers into it, they were able to, for several hours, measure a resonance from that, meaning that basically the moon was ringing like a bell, and the mass of the moon is actually lower than what they would expect for a rock of that size. So there is a bit of hollowness to the moon as well. Rick Gabbert, when was the first disappearance in Bermuda and Alaska Triangle? Well, that's a good question, because with the Bermuda Triangle, you're talking, quite an extensive history. With either of these, we don't know the full history, because these areas have existed for thousands of years. But if you take like the Bermuda Triangle, as far back as we mentioned Christopher Columbus. Now, ships were sailing to and from after Columbus came to America. Ships were sailing to and from quite a lot, and so you'd have to do some research to find out, okay, what was the first shipwreck in that area, after Columbus discovered America, or has the claim of discovering America. We know it was, like the Vikings beforehand, or even earlier, Templars, Egyptians. There's a lot of theories as to what really happened back then. But in any case, if you're going from Columbus's point in time, well, probably one of those shipwrecks following him. As far as Alaska, whenever flight started becoming a little bit more normal, you're talking 40s. That missing Douglas was right at 1950, so a little bit before that, 1940s. But you're talking, at least since the number that they like to throw out is since 1988, 16,000 people have gone missing since then. But there have been a lot of high-profile cases. We had the U.S. House Majority Leader, Hale Boggs, in the early 1970s was lost. They have no idea whatever happened to the airplane. Is just gone. Kind of like with the missing Douglas, completely gone, no trace of it whatsoever. Now, what was interesting about the missing Douglas, though, is that shortly thereafter, like a couple months later, there was a smaller plane that went missing in the same area, which they were able to find immediately. But yet this much larger plane, on a clear day, they couldn't. It's really weird. And then the other one, let's see. So we spent a lot of time here. The other one was the Lake Michigan Triangle. Tom McNicholas down there in the chat put me onto this one a while ago, because it's up there near Chicago and all that. I'll give you a shout out there, Tom. Now, there's a series of stories, and if you watch that video on the Hunter Road Media YouTube channel, you'll get a ton of those between, was the O.M. McFarland, Captain Donner. He just went completely missing from his cabin. They were out on a run with the boat, delivering some ore or whatever it was, and he said, "Hey, wake me up when we get near to port." So as they're getting near to port, the crew knocks on his door, and he's not answering. They try to open the door. The door was locked. They keep knocking, trying to open the door. Nothing. He's not answering. What in the world's going on? So they end up breaking down the door, and he's gone, just completely disappeared. And of course, it's seems unusual that it doesn't seem like he would have toss himself overboard or whatever, because he was like, "Hey, I'm tired. I'm going to lay down, go to sleep, and just wake me." So he gave them instructions to come get him, and just boom, he was gone. Flight 2501 Northwest, another one from 1950, where flying over the lake. Now that one did meet with some nasty weather. They ended up having to really lower their altitude and they were gone. They've never recovered the plane. What's interesting about that is shortly thereafter, within a couple hours, a couple of police officers claimed that they saw red lights over the lake. Now, these red lights have been seen over the lake since about 1913 was the first sighting, or at least first reported sighting for lights over the lake. So we don't usually think of UFO sightings in the early 1900s, but people have reported lights in the skies for a long, long time. And so, at least in that area, since about 1913. And they were seen over the lake just after this disappearance. So, a lot of these types of stories there around Lake Michigan. Well, what's interesting about Lake Michigan, we mentioned the Bimini Road before. Well, Lake Michigan has these standing stones. They're not huge like Stonehenge, but they are in a similar formation as Stonehenge. They have the same alignment as Stonehenge. These are in about 40 feet of water. It's not extremely deep, about 40 feet of water in Lake Michigan. And there are theories out there that these standing stones could be either helping to power the lake or what these standing stones were tapping into, because you got to remember the ancients, when they put these standing stones up there, yes, they were to usually align with something celestial, but they were built in these places to be able to tap into that earth energy that we were talking about before. So if there is that energy within the ground here, well, it's under the lake. There's all these crazy things that happen in and around the lake. So there must be one of these nodes, for lack of a better term, of energy. I see Tom had mentioned or asked there in the chat, are they different than ley lines? He's talking about the telluric currents. So these are terms that kind of get mixed up together. So the telluric currents that's the actual energy that's flowing through the earth. The ley lines are basically us recognizing that, hey, we've built different sites like the standing stones, or a temple, or a church, or some place of worship, or what have you, in these different locations. They've all lined up. Well, our ancestors long, long ago, when they were building these locations on these sites, because they were tapping into the energy. Now, some of them didn't even realize that's what they were doing, because a lot of times what ends up happening is we build a church or a temple on top of a site that was already sacred to begin with, and we had deemed it sacred because either there's already a previous structure on there, or there were standing stones there, or whatever. A lot of our ancestors didn't realize what it was that made the place so special. They just knew that it was special because of their ancestors, and so it goes way, way back. But it was special. The ancients knew that this place was special because of that energy. That energy was the telluric current. So what ended up happening is, over the millennia, all these places ended up lining up. That's the ley line, are the lines of the structures that were built up. But underneath, what flows through the earth is the telluric currents, the earth energy grid. But the terms get confused a lot. Our friend Freddie Silva, the first time that we had him on, back when we were still doing the Edge of the Rabbit Hole show on the Haunted Road Media YouTube channel, I had him for like the first, 10 minutes of the show, kind of explain that difference. He does a fantastic job because he's done research on this for a couple of decades. So, Victoria Monday, I heard that Walmarts are built on historically sacred sites. Yeah, that's actually well, what's sad? Galveston, Texas, where years ago they had that massive hurricane go through, that orphanage that was completely wiped out. There's a historic marker there now for it, but they built a Walmart on top of where that orphanage had been. So they'll do that with Walmart. Insane. All right. So moving on, because we're talking about the Earth's energy. We have standing stones here under the water. Well, let's get into some other mysterious locations, like the Great Sphinx, the riddle of the Sphinx. So what's interesting about the Sphinx, what's more mysterious to me about the Sphinx, of course, there are a lot of things. One, I think most people agree this is probably not the original head of the Sphinx, that it was recarved from something else. Now, people debate over what that originally was, but most likely it was not the head of a human. But that's what's there now. So we have no idea what it originally looked like. There are, of course, the mysteries of what's under it. A lot of people talk about if there's a library that's under there. Edgar Cayce predicted that there was something buried under the right paw of the Sphinx. Well, testing has been done that there is a hollow area under that paw. They have not allowed anybody to get under there. The other part is, how old is this thing? Well, of course, mainstream would have you guess much, much younger. And then people say, well, the erosion here is from the enclosure area is from water, and so it would make it much, much older than it is. So this is the big debate over the Sphinx, is exactly how old is this thing? And I tend to go with the older dates because, I've been able to make, rivulets like this, in my backyard when I was a kid playing in, with the hose. You can actually see that, type of water erosion. Now, I'm not a geologist, but, I can see it when I look at it. But of course, right there by the Sphinx are the Great Pyramids. Lining up here in this particular photo with Orion. Many, many mysteries about the pyramids. And I don't even know which ones we're going to go into, or I don't even think we have time to really dive into it all. We got about 15 minutes left in the show. Yes, it is a very cool pick. But I'll have a lot more coming out on Egypt next year. But big mystery here, of course, is, what was their real function? There were no bodies ever found here. Again, mainstream likes to say that these were, tombs, but no bodies were ever found here. Now, there are many theories as to what the Great Pyramid could have been, from being its own power plant to being a place of being able to ascend into another dimension. A lot of different theories as to what exactly it was. And there's B3 aerospace power stations. Yeah. So, and also saying, I feel the Sphinx was built by the Göbekli Tepe folks. Yeah, I didn't even include Göbekli Tepe here, which is definitely, that's another mysterious location. I could only choose so many, but I'm glad you guys are bringing up some other ones here as well, because that's another mysterious location. It really threw a monkey wrench into all the dating of these ancient structures. Not really of the ancient structures, but it threw a monkey wrench is the dating of civilization, because Göbekli Tepe now became like, the oldest known temple of its kind. At that time it was built, and we're talking like over 10,000 years ago. Humans were just supposed to be hunter-gatherers. So what are a bunch of hunter-gatherers doing building a massive, massive temple complex like that? It just doesn't make any sense. So it really calls into question everything that we know about the birth of civilization. I like the idea of, that civilizations have been cyclical, that we've built up this great knowledge over time, and then it gets wiped out and we have to build it up again. Things like the pyramids. There's a lot of aspects to them, and some of these huge megalithic structures around the world that we're only now coming into the technology and the know-how to be able to build some of these things. Some of them we still really don't know how they would have done it, but yet they did back then. So somewhere along the way we lost the knowledge, where they had developed some system that was amazing, and then we lost it, and then we built back up and we lost it. So these great mysteries of the world. So we see that with the pyramids in Egypt, and I could throw out all kinds of pyramids as well from around the world. This is Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Moon. Another fantastic structure, and there's all kinds of Mayan pyramids that I could have thrown in here, but I just wanted to throw it out there, at least one. But again, another one of these amazing sites of power. And I come back to Stonehenge because we're talking about the sites of power. The idea that the ancients knew of this energy that they could tap into, and I find it really intriguing now that we're starting to relearn about these things now, on the precipice of our world in chaos. Is this, it makes me wonder, is this sort of what happened before, that we had all of these, all of this knowledge, and we knew, how to do all of these different things, in the whirlwind, the chaos, and, we had to start all over again. I mentioned Atlantis before, talking about the Bimini Road, but it does make me wonder about Atlantis. And I put it out there in a video before. I actually asked Johnny Enoch when he was on the show. It was a completely, random, wild question that just popped into my head. But could Atlantis have been a giant portal? That maybe they had one of these, standing stone structures in the center of the city, like what we see with something here like Stonehenge. And they tapped into too much power, and they essentially annihilated themselves. And we've seen across the world in some of these ancient civilizations splashes of energy that have been expelled that we can't really account for. Like, how in the world did this happen, with this ancient culture? Now, these standing stones were supposed to be able to tap into this type of energy. I also include here Drombeg. So this is in Ireland. I had to throw this in there. I had to throw this into the mix because we're going to be going to Ireland next year. That's another standing stone structure. But another one that I actually, that's one that we're going to be going to next year. One that I went to this past year was Chaco Canyon. Not a standing, a set of standing stones, but actually a massive complex of dwellings, of ceremonial chambers. You see the kivas here. This is basically where they would hold those ceremonies. There's a lot of different theories as to how these looked at one point. They may have had wooden ceilings. The ancient alien guys think they had domes. We don't know. But what is really interesting about this location is that it is aligned to the stars, and the peoples there. The Anasazi talked about the star people. So Of course, they'll relate that, the ancient alien guys will relate that to aliens, and it may have been, or some people from the heavens or what have you, but they were certainly tapping into an energy that was there. I was there and I felt it. There's definitely a buzz about the place that you can still feel to this day, even though the location lies in ruins. And I met a woman there. She was a native Hopi, and the Hopi are supposed to be the descendants of the Anasazi. We don't know for sure, but that's what most people believe. And with her specifically, she could also feel that energy there, and said that she could feel the energy of her ancestors there within the stone. And I certainly believed her. So there's a lot of interesting things about this location. If you ever get a chance to go out there, it's in New Mexico. Definitely check it out. Another thing that I found interesting was like this here. This is basically, I guess you could call it a little hallway. Those on the podcast aren't going to be able to see this, but it's only about 3.5, 4 feet tall. It's not very tall. You have to really crouch down to get under there. Now, some people have tried to say, well, people were just shorter back then. And I'm like, well, yeah, they may have been a little shorter, but they're not that short. I think there was something much more, maybe religious or reverent about this, where they were basically forcing their people to bow down to walk through there to get into the other chamber. And that other chamber that's on that side had some interesting other structures to it, so that there was an inlet in one of the walls where you would put something. I mean, I don't know if you were to put an idol or whatever, and then there was a little basin on the floor, and just some other things about that chamber that had a more ceremonial nature about it. So it makes sense to me that you would bow down getting into there. Now, one of the other interesting things, I didn't include the photo here because that was on another device, was a T-shaped structure. I say structure, but really it would be like the inverse of a structure. Basically, it was a T-shaped doorway. And the T-shaped doorways are, you see them throughout the region, down into some of the Aztec structures. And it's supposed to, signify, something, I guess, more religious in nature, for lack of a better term, something more reverent when you walk through that door. So you have to walk through there from the other side to get into there, and then you have this other doorway where you have to, crouch down. And that T-shaped doorway was kind of regular sized, but it was the T-shape. It was something that's interesting. B3 Aerospace mentioned Göbekli Tepe to me, or mentioned Göbekli Tepe earlier in the chat. And what struck me while I was there, I recorded a segment on it, but I didn't actually include it in my Chaco Canyon walkthrough video, was, to me, the T-shape reminded me of the T-shape, although there were structures, at Göbekli Tepe. So basically, I was seeing similarities from a structure in New Mexico to a temple structure in the Middle East. Now, there are thousands and thousands of years difference between the two, but I still find the similarities interesting. That you could have these things, these ancient structures like this, mysterious areas of the world, thousands and thousands of miles apart, thousands and thousands of years apart, but still have similarities to them, still have connections to each other in some way. We've talked a lot about the connected universe on here, and I hadn't yet mentioned it tonight, but many of these things do have connections to each other. And if we go back to the solar currents, the Earth's energy grid, they're all connected to each other anyway through the Earth. But I believe the ancient people knew this. And you see similarities between a lot of these structures that supposedly they didn't have connection to each other physically, but yet they were still creating similar things across the world, which is really, really interesting. So how did they know to do that? B3 Aerospace saying teleport. Well, maybe they did know a way to teleport back then, and we just have forgotten that now. Maybe that's what they use some of these structures for. Where is that one? Is it Tiwanaku that has the gateway stone, where basically it's carved into the mountain, the gateway, the Stargate, that just looks like a doorway to nowhere? It's interesting. So did that actually function at one point in time? We really don't know. All right. I think that was it. Yep, Chaco Canyon was my last one on here. So if you guys have any other comments or questions, throw them out down there. B3 Aerospace, ancients had more technology than we think. They absolutely did. It's not technology in the way we think of it today. And I think that's where people kind of get crossed up, because when people talk about lost civilizations and a global cataclysm destroying them, they'll talk about how it was a society, it was a civilization that had high technology. And when we think of high technology today, we think of like computers and cell phones and things like that. And I don't necessarily think that they had those types of things, but they had other technology that in many ways surpasses what we have today. I mean, to be able to create those structures that we can't today, they had to have some form of technology that was higher than ours to be able to do that, in a sense. So they knew how to do things that we couldn't. We know how to do things that they can't, like maybe this computer and the cell phone and all that. So there's different forms of being a high technology. I think people kind of get focused as to, well, this is what high technology means. Well, no, there's different forms of it. So, Robert Hanna, how about the stories of the Vimanas? The Vimanas, yeah, you're getting into the Indian culture. We're not going to have time for that tonight. We're already at our hour mark, and those would take quite a while. But I did make a reference to them earlier when I was talking about kind of the cataclysms, annihilating certain civilizations that, how we may have done it to ourselves in some sense. Victoria Monday, Easter Island, the heads, what's up with that? Excellent question. I'll refer you right now to Freddie Silva's work, because we are at the end of the show. Freddie actually covers a lot on the heads. There's the interesting thing about Easter Island is, of course, that one, it may have been bigger than it used to be. How they move those heads, we don't really know. Again, the mainstream kind of has their theories. Well, they rolled them into place with rollers, and it's like, well, there's not even trees on the island to make that happen. There are stories of giants that had once lived on the island, like when Easter Island was first discovered, that there were actually giants that roamed on the island. So did they have a hand in creating these and propping them up and all that? Possibly. They seem to have similarities to heads on and statues on other islands within the Pacific Rim. So were they, people that traveled on boat to that island? Possibly. So there's a lot of different theories about Easter Island as well. So, but we're not going to be able to get into those this evening. We are going to have to wrap it up. So I really do appreciate everybody hanging out tonight and talking about mysterious places of the world. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many mysterious places on the earth, and you guys have really been asking some great questions about other ones that I didn't have on my little selection here. Christy, we'll be returning to Chaco Canyon in the near future. I would love to. Chaco Canyon was extremely high on my bucket list, and if you have seen any of my content that I posted from Chaco Canyon on Haunted Road Media YouTube channel or on my Instagram or anything like that, I had a little video out there. I think it was an Instagram live that I did where I was just like, I love this day. I was so excited to be there. So I definitely want to go back, because I've really just, I hit Pueblo Bonito and a couple of the other locations, but there's a lot to explore there. And I only had like about 5 or 6 hours to spend there, because I was on the way back from the Shock Fest in Vegas and going back home. So I didn't have a ton of time. But yes, I definitely want to get back there. So, all right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up and get to the shout outs.